I'm a writer, creative consultant, and editorial director at Days Media. We're here doing the Rubric panel on gender.
Like a lot of it is about fun and like a lot of it is about novelty in a way. And I do think that there is like a certain novelty baked in, like socially baked into the construct of like masculine and feminine and like men designing for women. Like people just think that's like so delightful and cute. And then like women designing for men are ultimately the women in design who are making the biggest waves. Like you have Emily Bodie and you have Grace Wales Bonner and you have, I really do think part of it is like extraordinary talent on behalf of the women that I just talked about. But also there is this like interest in the novelty of like, what is this different point of view for like what does a man have to say about a woman, and like that is more interesting because it's like there's a disparity or there's a dissonance there, which of course it isn't, because we have to put these clothes on our bodies, and like having someone who understands our bodies design them is super interesting, and I think and necessary. And the ways in which I personally relate to that is that in styling, this is like every Black woman's, any woman really, but most Black women's motto. It's like, fuck it, I'll just do it myself. And I always say, like, when you prove that you can do hell, no one's going to give you heaven. So it's like we end up as stylists getting, the assignments that are like, this is a non-traditional body, and like, this is an older woman. And there are these moments in which really like female stylists like get it better and do it better. And then this like whole other field of like fantasy and exploration, and it's so much easier to be able to tap into that when you aren't connected to or understand the women's body and can look at the fashion as something that is separate from the people that they go on. And I think all of it is just, I mean, it's a little bit of like absurdity, but I think it's just fashion being like kind of frivolous with the need for like what fashion actually means. Like, is it about the visual? Is it about the construction of the clothes? Or is it like, are these clothes that we put on our body and they should function as such? And like, do we want people making them who have all of the amazing, fantastical and artistic ideas that every male creative director has at the top of their brand, but also really gets down in these clothes?
So talking about like styling as a specific like realm or a photo shoot or something, it's like maybe the creative director is the most important, and then but like usually it's like, say there's the photographer is most important or whatever, and if that photographer is a man or something, right, like as traditionally it has been, and traditionally it's been the woman as an editor or a stylist, and it's like, in our industry that partnership is so integral, and like it's basically equal, really. It's like she's the one who puts something in front of him to take a picture, if that's, if we're talking about the traditional way. And so that partnership is so like equal, and yet who owns that picture because they took it, right? And who gets to profit off the money of that picture? And yeah, maybe she has to ask him for it if she wants to put it in her book, or show it on a talk or something, if she has to get permission from that photographer's foundation or something. And it's so interesting that like we put that hierarchy when really like, okay, would that picture happen if she wasn't there even? And so you sort of like think about like that we've built these hierarchies to sort of like keeps a certain person in a certain spot, instead of like raising them to the same level of the amount of effort and the amount of time and the amount of skill that it's required to make that result happen. And so it's like an interesting thing sort of to think about like where we're like left and where we're kept, and why things can't move, and the roles that we take or whatever that are as important really, like in the grand scheme of things, if we just we're allowed to view it that way.
I want to talk about gender and being a woman, both in our interpersonal relationships with other women in the industry, and then with ourselves in terms of our body and representation in that sense. I actually want to preface this by saying that I actually think this has been passed down from past generations of editors who really love to perpetuate a certain type of cattiness and a certain type of, it can only be you and me. And I actually think, I'm going to say this, that I think our generation of editors have really dispelled that. There is such incredible support, and everyone's really, really encouraging and shouts people out. Have you ever felt threatened being in the position that you're in, or feeling like you could be the only person, or felt that. And I think we should speak candidly about it, because I think it's something that's much perpetuated in fashion, and we should dispel, you know, what really happens.
I think that notion that there can be only one is fucking insidious, and it's everywhere. It's everywhere I go. I have known about most of the people that I sort of interact with in fashion for years. I knew all of the POCs, but I felt like for a really long time we weren't allowed to talk to each other or like be friends, because it seemed like competition. So for example, lovely Nell and I have been doing the same job for a really long time, but Nell worked at Days and I worked for loads of different freelance publications, and it was always very much like there can only be one really like indie girl that's black, like they can't both. So like, you know, pick, but you can't both sort of like share the spotlight. And I remember trying to spend a lot of time just dispelling that notion within myself and not getting panicked. But then every time I would talk myself out of that and be like, no, there's enough room for everybody, I would encounter somebody else who would tell me that that wasn't true, that I needed to be better than everybody else, and that there could only be one of me, and that person, even though, like, you know, not necessarily particularly Nell, but anybody who was a stylist at the same time that I sort of started styling, it was always like, there can only be one of you, because really it's this person that's the favorite, and then it's you, so what you need to do. And it just sort of, I heard it so much that I almost like didn't want to interact with people, and I would keep myself to myself because it would just trip me out, especially because, you know, work is probably the one thing I'm quite confident about. But I do think when you're around lots of people that sort of make you feel like this thing that's been given to you is very rare and will be taken from you because there's no one else, you know, because really there's not that many spots out there. It's quite terrifying. I mean, I don't think that now, because I've just done a lot of sort of work on myself and I don't keep that sort of frightful internal monologue. But I do, like you said, think that everybody else, and this generation in particular, we're all so kind and so supportive and so much like, you did this really good thing, and are so public about it, that you sort of like flush that toxicity out. But I mean, the bluntness of it, I want all of those people in the upper generations to go, and I'm over it. So
I know. It's like, you really just hope that like that fear that there's going to be like one person who holds on to the seed of that ideology that can like really just, it's so cancerous and so insidious, as you said. And I just want us all to like have a summit and be like, so just so we're clear, we're not doing that anymore, right? Yeah. It's not it. Like, we really have to just because it's so poisonous that it really informed the way that I even socialize. At the end of the day, it also boiled down into like cliquishness, because I was like, okay, well, if there's not only one of us, maybe there can be a group of us, but then we all have to be in the same group and like make sure no one else can get into that group. And that is like, as somebody who is an extrovert by way of like self-preservation, like I'm a gag because I'm like have crazy social anxiety. So it made it really hard for me to socialize with people whose work I loved, who communities I like wanted desperately to be involved with, and whose minds I really respected, because I would project the idea of competition that was like instilled in me from this idea that this town isn't big enough for the two of us. So like, I hope we can like be really effective in that PSA for at least the generation after us. I think you're right, Lynette, that like we're the first group that's kind of breaking down those social barriers that are also work-related barriers that end up becoming creative output barriers. But I think the next generation, like Gen Z, has got it.
But I definitely think there's been a distinct turning point from even when I was an intern of how I would hear senior editors talk about other magazines and publications, to how we all interact and how we are at fashion weeks or events or things like that. It doesn't feel as intimidating, definitely from my perspective, and it's been really kind of affirming.
I do feel that still, unfortunately, our work and as individuals we're held to a different standard. I do think that it's far more celebratory and collaborative, and I don't feel like I'm pitted against another Black woman, but I certainly still feel that I have to go above and beyond, and I find that exhausting. And I have felt that less so throughout my career, but I still feel that in certain situations I have to measure myself because certain people perceive me to be a certain way. And if I say one thing wrong, my counterpart, my white counterpart or a male counterpart could say the same thing, and for it to be taken in a completely different context. And whether it's the trope of the angry Black woman or however many other stereotypes there are, I still do feel them within certain contexts, and it's fucking infuriating.
It's so interesting how like being an outspoken, confident, direct Black woman in all of us work in a creative field, but we ultimately work in corporate fields as well. And within a corporate creative environment is interpreted as like antagonistic. Like, I just don't understand why just saying what you mean to say is something that, as you said, is like life or death for us in our environments, when we really see it occurring across the entire male landscape and the entire white landscape and the entire cis het landscape. And it shocks me in this, for lack of a better term, this is so disgusting, but woke era, because I don't even know how the fuck to say it. Like, I just feel like in this woke era, it's like, how is it still acceptable to problematize women at the top of their field saying what they're paid to say? Maybe this town is only big enough for this one person, because this one person like really intrinsically understands corporate capitalist structure and is like, okay, well, maybe I'm not gonna be so loud on this shit, and then I can be signed to this agency, and then I'll get this client, and there's no way to disrupt or break that like incrementally in my mind. Like, I really feel that summit idea sounds so crazy, but I really feel like that's the only way. Like, I really feel like we all have to collectively be like, we're not doing this anymore. And I don't know how realistic that is. So as much as I want to feel like hopeful that we're moving in the right direction, there is like pessimism that creeps in, because I see the repetition of this like problematic structure happening with people who don't actually believe in it and don't want to participate in it, but like that's the road to success and acceptance. And, you know, do you guys ever feel that way? I don't know,
it's
maybe
hard. It's like a balance.
This is very much me going into my like emotional bag, but
we're a little bit post getting in the room. I do feel like I've seen that. I feel like, okay, now we're in the room. I don't think there is enough sufficient support to get us where we can be reaching our full potential.
Right.
And it has to be understood, if you're going to take on a minority voice, that there might be more skills, there may be more things that that person needs to be able to succeed. And it is a bit on the onus of you to make that possible. It's not even preferential treatment. It's about understanding culturally, societally, what that person might have experienced in their life and what tools they may be missing, what they might be missing or what they may need. And I definitely think throughout my career, that's been something I felt has been largely lacking and a really hard thing to try and explain.
Right.
Because
like
it makes it
ask
seem,
for, tell people, yeah, like what you
exactly.
need.
It makes it seem like you want preferential treatment. It's like, no, that's just like maybe not my experience, or maybe I felt really uncomfortable for years in that thing, or, you know, for me, it's like I never even thought that I would be here. You know, I've been thinking a lot about my story, as it were. And I was like, there would definitely be a chapter in my biography or autobiography or whatever that was called The Accidental Editor, because Lord knows it wasn't meant to happen and I never thought it would. So, but that mindset, that imposter syndrome mindset doesn't go away, and it doesn't go away even when you're in the positions.
In order for people to kind of get everybody to the right level, someone has to give up their privilege, and the fact is no one's willing to do that. That's the fucking problem, is that every time you enter something, you know, I go and meet agencies all the time and they tell me, well, we won't take you on because we've already hired a black stylist. And you're like, oh, okay, because there can only be one, right? Like, there's just situations like that happen. You know, you have brands who kind of go, we are looking at other stylists, and they make it a point to say they're looking at other POC stylists. So then it's that thing of kind of just setting the wheels in motion and like pranging everybody out without giving them the support or the tools to make everyone feel like, you know, they can be there. Whereas, I don't know, we celebrate white mediocrity all the time. There are thousands of terrible, terrible white stylists that are kicking around having a fucking lovely time, profiting on the industry. But like, I need to run laps. I need to run actual laps for people to think I'm amazing. You know,
no lies detected. No lies detected.
Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous and just unfair. I would like to just be, you know, I'd like to do the bare minimum like everybody else.
It is so true, that idea that like, no, but baby, like, you're not just playing the game. Like, you need to be Kobe Bryant all-star game level highest. Why am I doing sports analogies? I do not watch sports. Very weird. All I'm just gonna say is that you have to be the best to be good enough to even be in the room. And it's like, that is so wild. to me, because we all then became the best, and then we all got into the room, and then y'all weren't letting us do what we did best.
It's still like, can you just be quiet over there? So it's a bit like, well, what have we done before?
We really have to fight for the idea that it's like, it's exactly as Lynette said, we're post getting in the room, but it's like, it's not like get in the room, you're here now, but like, shut the hell up.
Yeah.
It's like, you're here now. Why are you here? Can we like create space for your voice to actually be channeled in a way that is like helpful in growing this entire business or this entire brand or whatever room you are, you know, end up getting into. But there's like this real resistance, this ownership, this like indentured servitude mentality of like, okay, but we let you in here, so just like, don't kick up a fuss. It's so crazy to me. It's really wild.
Calling upon Black members of our community for within very specific conversations. Like, I know that come Black History Month, I'm going to get lots of different publications asking me to write a think piece. And I'm like, for the love of God, no. where are you when you want an interview with whoever? Or it's just, I think we need to see that move on for us to really see that true acceptance where we're not just continually being used within a very, very narrow framework.
Oh my God, I'm so glad you said that. There is so many magazines that only ask me to write if it's a Black subject. And I sometimes feel like putting in my on my signature, I can also write about different subjects. We do work in an industry that has, you know, is incredibly guilty of only perpetuating a certain body stereotype, and we, you know, it's long documented about how that impacts how we feel about ourselves, how culturally and the different types of women that we're putting to the forefront. Again, I do see a change. I want to get where you guys think we're at and how, if at all, it's affected your own personal experience of your own body as women identifying.
As someone who spends a lot of time calling in clothes that don't ever fit her, I've been so used to that I'm almost like somewhat desensitized. So with this new sort of wave of body positivity, and I say that for a reason because it seems to be co-opted and doesn't seem to make sense. It's like, okay, so we like this model, but this model has a flat stomach and presents in a certain way, so that's why she's able to like walk all these shows. But then we pat ourselves collectively as a community, we pat ourselves on the back for doing the bare minimum. And what I would love is if we told normal stories and real stories of real people, and it didn't seem like such a weird thing. Like
something so special.
Yeah, every time I enter a fashion space, people talk about how I dress. And I'm like, well, I dress really well because I make sure everything is custom, because I'm loud, and because I think it's absolutely fine to like nice things and live in a bigger body. And I can't be the only person. I just love everyone to tell stories on a better level. Or if you're going to do it, let's do it properly. If not, let's not do it at all. And I'm absolutely fine with that. Like, you can, whatever way you slice it, it's absolutely fine. But what I don't like is the constant celebration and putting, I think as well, putting plus size models under lots of pressure to represent everybody when that's not how that works.
I think the self-congratulatory aspect of it all is super frustrating because it creates the illusion that like we've done something when in reality it's like, yes, we've made the right step forward. But what I really want people who maybe are not as involved in the industry and have less sophisticated knowledge about the way that this concept of embracing all sizes works. So I want them to understand like how limited what we're doing actually is. Like when you see a plus size model on a runway, they are wearing a look that was custom made for them so that they could participate in that show. It yields one sample that then has to be shared between every single territory and every single editor in the world, whoever wants to shoot someone who's not a sample size. And then when it goes into fabrication to be sold in stores, it is typically only made up to a size 10 or 12. So you could see a size 16 on a runway and never be able to purchase a size 16, that exact 16 dress anywhere in stores. And so at the end of the day, it is at least theoretically and superficially a step forward because at least we have a visual to attach to a body that is different than a sample size. But in practicality, it actually isn't changing the high fashion landscape. We can congratulate ourselves for, you know, creating the image that celebrates the body, but if it can't live in the practical real world, we haven't done anything except for create a simulation of what acceptance should look like. You disassociate and kind of compartmentalize in a way, and it's like, okay, well, these are the clothes that are made in this way, and I'm very happy to put them on models that fit them, because my joy in creating images is like what that picture looks like. But I also feel like an incredible sense of responsibility as somebody who looks like me, who's a plus size Black woman. I always feel like, okay, well, I do feel that pressure of like, okay, I need to be speaking to people who look like me. My images need to look like people who look like me. And it's exactly like Dara said, it's like that image of Natalia Vodanova falling down the rabbit hole is also my image. And that also made me fall in love with fashion. And I don't want to feel guilty for taking that image or working in that way, because that means that it's an opportunity stripped from speaking to diversity. It's like this idea that we have to be responsible for fixing the problems that affect us is so annoying. I'm like, I need someone else to go do that. Like, why? Like, I love doing it, and I appreciate and respect and love and like visually am attracted to creating images with diverse body types. But at the end of the day, this stylist who doesn't look like that should also be held to the standard of creating those images. Yeah. Like, we don't need to fix racism and misogynoir. Like, we just, like, that's not on me as a Black woman, like that's on y'all white people.
If we could move past the idea of a white cis body being the archetype of a woman's body, like for me, I'm built differently. I think just because I'm Black and female. Bodies come in all different shapes and sizes, but I have more this and more that. And it's to constantly have to mentally peel myself back and be like, it's okay that this doesn't fit, even though it has this label in or whatever. It's still something, even with all the knowledge, even with kind of being more of an insider than most consumers, fucks with me all the time. I'm like, why doesn't this fit? This should fit. Or why don't I like the way that I look in this? Or should I look like this if I see someone in a, I don't know, a Miu Miu skirt, like, although we're really not going to go there, but like, should, you know, it's really a constant fuckery, basically.
Yeah. We are expanding, but still replicating beauty standard. The whole concept is so at odds with itself, because the idea of body diversity means that that diversity needs to be big enough to include all types of bodies. So when we say like, okay, well, now there's a size 16 on the runway, it's like, okay, but then, so when is it going to be the size 24? And when is it going to be the size 30? And when is it going to be the size 50? It's like, we're still creating parameters of acceptability. And so if we're still beholden to this idea that there is, you know, a golden ratio, like you were talking about, Jeanie, like a flat stomach and the wide hips and the small waist, it's like, that's still incredibly problematic. It's either full liberation or it's slavery of the mind, you know what I mean? So until we're like willing to have that conversation, we're just giving ourselves a pass and like extending the goalposts of what we're boxing ourselves in with.
We're a long way off, because I think the limit does not exist. You know, fashion is, there's been progress. I always want to shout out that I do think there's been progress. It's like to include and acknowledge different gender identities within its narratives. How do you guys think that the industry can continue to treat everyone better with the understanding of that we, you know, constantly need to be evolving?
I think a lot of the time people think about it like, okay, I need to, like, how do I, as a cis person, accommodate trans people or non-binary people or gender non-conforming people? And instead, like, and they don't necessarily think about, how do I interrogate my own experience, my own gender, my own life, and all the things that I've been taught and the way I see other people, and how do I change that, right? Like, it's always like, how do I change this, like, you know, scenario so I can be polite to you about something that sort of, to me, seems sort of fictional or whatever, is in your mind or something. And it's not necessarily changed inside their own mind, right? And that's why, you know, you still get constant misgendering. It's like, I still, every time I've been on set, still do. And even though my gender pronouns are on the call sheet, it doesn't matter, right? It's like, yeah, maybe I'm at the top of the call sheet, but it's like, people are still not seeing me for who I actually am and aren't talking to me as the person that like I know myself to be and everyone in my life knows me to be, right? And so it's a funny sort of thing because people aren't like turning that click onto themselves, like, or like turning those questions onto themselves. Once you've like thought about those things for yourself, you kind of change how you look at the whole world. And then you kind of, you know, to me, like they, them, or whatever, like using that pronoun is so neutral. It's like, you know, you talk about like, oh, a firefighter, they went there or whatever. And it can be so normal and people get so like up in arms and crazy about it and like, and sort of make it this trendy thing or scary thing or whatever. And to me, it's like, if you just literally like unblocked your mind about what those different words were supposed to mean and like how you use them and why you use them, it would become so easy. It wouldn't be this thing that you're doing for another person. It would be doing it for yourself and doing it for your own mind. And then it would change how your perspective on the whole world, and then change how you treat other people, you know?
People just need to stop being performative and being, like you said, just really honest and kind of like, it's taking the ownership away of like, it's not about trying to make somebody else comfortable. It's about you, like, how would you like to be treated when you enter a room? You want people to call you by your name and pronounce it properly and all that kind of stuff. Like,
yeah, exactly. Even just like saying your name or something.
Yeah, I don't know why the same logic can't fucking apply. And I spend all day having to get up on my little, you know, Apple box and do a little fucking speech. I've done it so many times that it's actually like, it's boring, but I'm gonna keep doing it because I'm like, it's not that fucking hard. You misgender a dog, people will lose their fucking mind. Misgender people all the time. It's insane.
I think it's perpetuated by a lot of fear. You know,
Yeah.
people are really afraid to ask the questions. People are really afraid to do the interrogation of themselves and ask and do the work of, hey, what's this? Because it makes them feel uncomfortable.
But what would you like to be called is like, that's a really simple sentence. You just apply that every time you meet a new person, you know?
People are scared to accept their unconscious bias or their prejudice, so they think that they're woke, for want of a better word, when truly they have so much self-education to do. I mean, we all do, but I think it's that disregard for that, their own lack of awareness, that's I see a lot.
I felt a lot of the time when I first started working that I shouldn't talk about being trans, because the only way that, like, the only thing that would happen would be that then you become this sort of like tent pole and like sort of like flag for a movement or something, instead of being like you as your individual person. And so I was like, okay, well then I'm never going to answer a question about that, but I'm going to like push and push and push all these other different parts of who I am. And then maybe those will be so distracting that suddenly people can see me as a person. A lot of the conversation around feminism or like women empowerment or something kind of like doesn't necessarily include the experience of other different types of women or women from different places. Well, why can't we open that up and make that definition broader and allow, you know, people to be like, okay, well, it's powerful for me to be delicate, or it's powerful for me to show weakness or vulnerability, and it's powerful for me to be powerful and tell people what to do and be a, you know, someone's boss or something. Like, it can be all of those different sort of definitions. What
we just discussed about being brave enough to ask the questions, always being cognizant of how you show up, what you want to represent. You know, I think a lot about like legacy, not in the kind of not in like a really triumphant way, but just what do you want your work and what do you want your output to say about you and how you think about the world. And I implore people, even at the beginning of their careers, to always have that as like a really great guiding self-principle, because I think when you know what you're about and you know what you want to represent, you show up in those spaces and you go really hard. Like, kudos to you, Gabby, for as an example, actually, of all the people on this call, actually, because I'm aware and fans of everyone. You know, hey, Gabby, I think about how you always have a guiding principle of having people show up in your work that represent your ideals and your standard of beauty. Same with you, Jeanie. Alice, definitely with, you know, your diversity in the work that you do, and the same with you, Dara. I think like that, when you have that guiding principle, it's really, really harder for people to knock you off track.
It's so easy to feel like camouflaging or masking or being something more similar to everyone around you will make it easier to navigate spaces in which you don't immediately feel comfortable. And I think your greatest asset is being so true to who you are that people, you know, refuse to see you any other way. It's exactly what Dara was speaking to earlier. I think like it will push you out of some rooms. Those aren't the rooms you want to be in. Or you can be like full guns blazing yourself and force your presence in those rooms. And even though it will be hard every single day you work there, it will make a difference for the people who come after you. So I think I would say like work isn't always supposed to be easy for people. My mom always said, like, if you're going to be crashing into a glass ceiling, like, do you think that's going to feel good? Like, it's going to hurt. Like, it's going to be painful. So if you can bear with it and stick in there, do it, but you also don't have to. Just stay true to yourself as much as you can. And people will try and make you feel like that makes you antagonistic or ornery or petulant. And it really just makes you like a confident human.
I think for me, in terms of us speaking about how the industry has evolved and become more celebratory and inclusive and collaborative, for every door that we open or any room that we enter, it's about bringing in our peers and collaborators and ensuring that they're in that room with you. And I think it's something as simple as challenging when a creative isn't credited in a tag on Instagram, all of these little things that are critical to ensure that we're championing and recognizing every person. Part two is just that the path may not be linear. I think there were so many times when I didn't get the job and I thought, that's it, I'm done. I just need to move out of this industry. But then what I saw as the side step was actually the right step, and the next role was actually more beneficial, and I learned so much more. And it wasn't my dream job at the time, but the hustle was real, and that taught me so much in the process. So I think, yeah, the path isn't always clear cut, but you can find the way there in the end. God, that sounded cringe, but oh well.
Be the change that you want to see, build communities, collaborate. The idea is to not just get a seat at the table, it's to take the table, break it in half and make a new one with everybody at it. And I wholeheartedly believe that. And I think if we all did it, then we wouldn't have the weird awkwardness, and like people wouldn't be feeling so sort of like scared of things, and we'd just all be able to move differently and navigate spaces a lot easier if we were all really honest and upfront. Yeah, so like walking your truth, basically.
To like notice when you're trying to prove yourself and when you're actually saying what you want to say. You say the strongest things when you just say what you actually want to say, and it comes really from, you know, your heart and your mind and what you've always thought and believed in, and it sort of notice the difference between proving something to other people and what you actually want to say.
Thank you all for joining us on the Rubric panel. I learned a lot. Everyone's amazing. Bye.
Thanks, Lynette. Thanks, Rubric.
Bye, guys. Bye.